Here's a lesson in leadership, and it's this. Leadership is lonely at times. And it's really lonely for guys like David. It's really lonely for Abraham. It's going to be really lonely for Abigail. It's going to be really lonely for people as they go down through. And the question is, in this loneliness and in this distress, where do you turn? Well, don't play games with the devil. Instead, do what David did. Because in verse 6, what does he do? He pursues God. He draws near to God. He finds strength for the moment in the Lord. Moreover, David was greatly distressed because the men were going to stone him. Verse 6, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Now, I want you to notice he assumes responsibility for his spiritual condition. Look at me. Stop pointing your finger at other people and using them to rationalize your spiritually weak soul. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is so important, beloved. You and I have to assume responsibility for our spiritual well-being. Don't be blame shifting. Don't be putting it on others. Well, the devil made me do it. Well, if I just had a different spouse, if I just had better kids, if I just had a better job, if I just lived in a better country, if I just lived someplace, if it was just better, then I would be. No, your problem is you. Remember a couple weeks ago we saw where the Apostle Paul says, I buffet my body daily, making it my slave, lest having preached to others, I myself should become a castaway. And what I want you to see in this passage is when David was younger and when he was isolated and in trouble, you remember he had a really good friend. His name is Jonathan, the son of King Saul. And it says Jonathan would come and he would strengthen him in the Lord and strengthen him in the Lord. Multiple times that happened in the past. The problem is Jonathan is up literally going to die within a few hours, 3 days march from him. And so he turns to the Lord, and he's seeking the Lord. He's getting strength from the Lord. Friends, you and I, in the difficulties of life, are going to have to get strength from God. That's why this passage is so important. That's why you need to know this story. What did David do in his distress? What will you do in your distress? Strengthen yourself in the Lord. Now, there's three things that I would suggest to you as I've watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 33 years, three things that will help strengthen your soul in difficulties. Write these on the back of your hand, on the inside of your eyelids or something, because you're going to need these three. Maybe right there in the margin of this Bible. So you go back to this story. Next time you're in distress and you're feeling betrayed and you're feeling alone and you feel like nobody knows and nobody cares, I just go back to this passage. David was feeling that way. What did he do? He strengthened himself. He assumed responsibility for his soul, and he does these three things. He gets alone with God. And then David was a songwriter, as you recall. The Psalms, that's how we get the Psalms during these running days of his journey. Now, he hasn't written a psalm in 14 months as you track through the Old Testament. But I'm always telling people, listen, you got to get alone with God. Second is you got to get a song. Many times those songs for me have been scripture as well because they've been from the book of Psalms. But when you're going to strengthen yourself, you got to be alone, get a song, and get a passage. This is the secret. Solitude. We live in a noisy world. And some of us have lived in so much noise, you freak out when it's quiet. I've got a well-known friend who grew up in the city. And he said he was going to go have a time of prayer and fasting. And so we had a friend who has a cabin up in the Sierras, way up in the mountains, and there's no one around, and it's dark and it's quiet, and there's no sirens, and there's just nothing, right? And he gets up there and he's like, I'm going to have this great spiritual pilgrimage with God. And it starts to get dark. And he's got all the lights on in the house. And then it's like, so quiet. And he's like, there could be someone out there trying to kill me. Bigfoot's going to get me. All these things start going through his mind, right? And he starts freaking out. He gets so freaked out, he ends up getting in his car and going back. It was just too quiet for him, all right? And I just want you to know this. You got to find some quiet place if you're really going to draw near to God. Second, you got to get a song. Third, you got to get a passage. A friend of mine texted me this picture this week. I love this picture. These guys are in the sun. This is Southern California. You'll notice he's got cowboy boots on. It just does my heart good, all right? There's nothing worse than getting burned down here in the ankles, man. Keep your boots on, right? Okay, I'm just telling you. All right, so my friend sends me this text, and this picture is in it. But I know what this text means. See, my friend is a worship pastor. People think, like pastors don't ever go through any difficulties. They don't have any hardships. How many of you know I got a really big crosshair from Satan right on my chest every day? All right? So this guy's an awesome worship leader in Southern California. He's got 2 sons, and both of his sons were killed in 2 separate car accidents on the same road about 1.5 years apart. Fluke accidents. They didn't do anything wrong. They weren't drunk. They weren't running from the police. I mean, there wasn't any insane thing going on. They weren't robbing a bank. Fluke accidents on the same road. The same road he drives every single day, going out to work and coming back. Every day he has to pass the 2 spots on that road. And they're not very far apart. Anniversary's coming up. He sent this to me. So I texted him back. I said, Sam, you're a great man of God. And Father's love is a precious, enduring commodity. Silence for a bit. Text came back. And he says this. He says, this was one of a couple of songs that really ministered to me right after the boys died. And then he's got the song there. It's Under His Wings. 4 minutes long. I listened to it. Texted him back. Man, I can see why that ministered to your soul. A few more texts. Then he says, the passage that got me through is Romans chapter 8. Many of you know that chapter. It says there, it poses a question, what shall separate us from the love of God? It says, I am convinced that neither death, life, having to endure and go on, angels, principalities, things present, things to come, powers, in other words, Satan and all of his demons and everything that's out there, the whole cohort, heights, depths, nothing created is able to separate me from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Sam has walked this journey of tremendous loss. Alone with God. Because nothing you and I can do, right? I mean, those of us who love him and his family, we sit on the outside. There's nothing we can do to change there's nothing. So you just sit there and you just weep with him, be quiet. His song that ministered to him and the passages sustained him. Friends, when you're going to go through tragedy, remember Ziklag, and David found strength in the Lord. What's going to happen as a result of this? David's going to get strength from the Lord. He's going to get up. He's going to turn to the priest. He says, bring the Urim and the Thummim. We're going to ask God what to do. Should we go out and fight these guys? Do we try and take these guys on? This is a massive army, and all I've got 600 guys. And my guys are totally wiped out. They've just marched 6 days. Not only that, we don't even have supplies. And so now what are we going to do? And so he gets the Urim and the Thummim. Now, keep in mind, Saul had killed all the priests. One priest has survived. He's been with David. He's got the Urim and the Thummim, basically 2 rocks. And we don't know what color they were or whatever, but there's one's a yes rock and one's a no rock. And so they'd ask the Lord. The priest would intercede on behalf of the people. Should David go up? The yes rocks lights up, or however that ends up working. It communicates, yes, this is what the Lord wants. So David then gathers his men and say, guys, stop crying. We're going to go get them. Get your swords, get your spears, get whatever you got, grab whatever supplies you got, whatever water, raisin cakes, whatever you got. Let's put it on and let's start going. And so they start the march. 20 miles goes by. 200 of them are so exhausted. He says, look, you guys just stay here. Guard some of our supplies. We're going to leave that with you. Rest of you, light and fast, let's go. And they keep on going. And God allows them to bring about a great slaughter, it says, of the Amalekites. You can say, oh, that's just horrible that God would use that. Friends, there's consequences to sin for the Amalekites and there's consequences for us. I'm just telling you. And their iniquities were full, and when that's done, God raises up a nation. In this case, it's David, and David drops the hammer on them, and God brings about a great victory. What I want you to walk away with is this. It's one of those verses in chapter 28. It's verse 28 of Romans 8 there. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Now I want you to look at the first line. We know. When you're alone with God, time of crisis, huge loss, betrayal, there's no one else, you're going to have to scream to yourself. We know! We know! It's one of the reasons you got to be alone, because I want to think you're crazy. All right? We know. It's not going to feel that way. Just feel. No. We know. Satan's going to say, God doesn't care. God's destroying you. This is the end of the world for you. This is it. No, we know that all things work together for what? Good. To those who love God. Psalm 91. It talks about how the righteous seek refuge under the wings of God. And they find safety there. 10,000 fall at my right hand, I will be saved. And you look on down, and God responds to this kind of person. And he says, because he loves me, I will rescue him. Listen, friends, this is not a verse you use when your friend David or Michelle or Charlotte loses somebody. You don't go read this verse to them. But you got to get this verse in you so that when you're alone with God and in that crisis, you can cry out by faith, God, I know all things work together for good to those that love you and are called according to your purpose. David's men are weeping, and in a matter of less than 48 hours, they're going to be rejoicing and celebrating. Why? Because God has been with them. Their wives are back with them. Their children are back with them. All of their goods that they needed to care for themselves and their families and their neighbors, all of that has been brought back. God has been with them. Listen, in the midst of that crisis, know for sure, hold on to the truth. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Ziklag, when you look back on this passage, you remember this. David, the man of God, found himself in a crisis. He found strength in the Lord, and he discovered the truth of this verse. It's a journey, friends. You're going to be on a path. You're going to need to know this chapter, because when you're all alone, when you've been betrayed, when you've been forgotten, when you've been attacked and assaulted, and you've lost things, you're going to have strength in yourself in the Lord, and you're going to discover this truth that David did. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Friends, strengthen yourself in the Lord. Turn to someone. I want you to say it gently to them. Strengthen yourself in the Lord. Give them the advice they need. Strengthen yourself in the Lord. Strengthen yourself in the Lord.